Lisa McCarrell is a high school history teacher from California that has been harassed, smeared, and almost canceled by her history teachings.
Yeah.
What kind of history do you teach that you got harassed, smeared, and almost canceled?
Well, I teach early U.S. history, basically from colonial to Reconstruction after the Civil War. And so there's definitely a hot topic with everything that's going on. You'd never think teaching your founders and about the principles of the nation as being an exceptional and great story or great people would then all of a sudden become demonized, or you'd have to tread on water, tread lightly, when speaking of such, of Jefferson or Washington or approaching issues.
Bigotry, racism, sexism, etc. All those people.
Yeah, well, you always have to, of course, bring that in, right? So, you can't ever tell the story. It was getting to the point where you told the exceptional story of our nation without always having to make sure you talk about the flaws, the negative, the bad, and definitely do they need to be talked about for sure. But with the heavy-handed judgment was, becoming challenging. And I wouldn't say I was exactly canceled yet, but I definitely was starting to lessons that I haven't ever had a problem with. Teaching for 16 years in that area of early U.S. history, all of a sudden started to have, the principal calling me in or a parent claiming that the lesson was racist or wanting more explanation about it.
Give me a few examples. What kind of lesson can be, a lesson of history can be racist?
It's just, one never showed up. I was, as a constitutional convention and studying the debate actually about the banning of the importation of slaves. And, so they have different snippets of the different people debating within that constitutional convention. And I would have them, look at each argument and try to break it down in a moral, economic, or political argument, first of all, because I think a lot of times, too, we need to dive in and look at why and what was their stance, not just what, and not just what without the why, right? So, just kind of trying to understand those arguments. There's just things like that. I don't quite know what was racist about it, but that was the case. I was told by a parent once that my room was too white.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Too white? You mean the walls? The color of the walls?
I think it's because I maybe had a poster of Lincoln and Washington up, although I did have posters at the time of Jamestown, and I pointed out with the Powhatan tribe, but maybe it just wasn't the right color that was supposed to be up on the board at the time. But, little things like that, you could just feel that, there was something going on.
But that's history. You can't make the personas. You can make the personas up, right? So you can't say that I made this person. He was he was Asian, or he was Mexican, Hispanic, he was black, or black African American or something. So you show in the classroom people that founded this country, the founding fathers.
Yeah.
And you were guilty of that they were all white, and you were showing them.
Yeah. Even though there was other stuff there, and again, it was actually a back to school night, and I was teaching an elective at the time, and so parents are filing in and filing out in between, and it's not just all about getting to know you and greeting, and a lot of parents just either I had their previous siblings and stuff, and just wanted to say, oh, nice to meet you on their way out, and these two parents, that I really thought I had a good connection with their child, and it was a fun class, and I did, but I was really thrown off when all of a sudden, they just had a face of, they were not happy, and the first thing out of their mouth was not like, hi, it's nice to meet you, Miss McCarrell, this is our daughter. It was, your room's too white. Like bunch of parents around, all waiting to say hi. One's coming in, some of that, and I was just thrown by that.
Wow, that started in 2021?
Yeah, it was before that. So it was before the whole COVID, and then eventually I was removed for refusing the vaccine. So the interesting thing is when we were in lockdown, and again, it just becomes where it's all about color, right? And you're just walking on eggshells, or you feel like you always have to. Everything is seen through that lens, unfortunately. Not the character, but it's now all defined by your skin color.
But it is defined as racism.
Yeah.
When everything you talk about is just the color of the skin, which we can't change.
Yeah.
We are who we are.
Right.
What happened with the vaccines? You refused to take one?
Yeah. Well, so yeah, and the interesting thing is that I was really bracing myself and regretting not being a PE teacher, with everything that was going down with the, Summer of Love and BLM, and it was a trying time, and I was just like, oh gosh, okay, so I'm going to be going back into this environment. I was already feeling, again, teaching this curriculum and being in that school for 16 years. I've never had any having to justify my lessons or be accused of being too white or things like that. So I kind of was already feeling that, and then just knew, oh my gosh, I'm going to go okay, I'm going to brace myself. This is going to be a tough year teaching. Not only having to teach through a diaper on my face, but also, having to touch the subject that I, teach. And, so I was, was not seeing that my fight would be my, bodily autonomy. That, no, I'm sorry. You're an educational institution, not my doctor. And also not going to tell me that I have to now not only wear a mask, not only test daily or weekly, weekly, had to be zapped, when you came in for your temperature every day. But now you're telling me, after returning and being on campus now, because we were moved in October. So I was there since August, but for some reason, October 15th, I became a threat and danger to my students. Yeah. And, so that's when you just know it was absolutely ridiculous. It was malicious, tyrannical.
What was the school? It's in Santa Monica or LA?
West LA.
West LA.
Yeah.
Very liberal?
It's an excellent school. It's a gifted magnet within LA Unified. It's a great school.
What about the principal? What kind of principal? He or she
he came in during COVID.
Oh, he was substituted.
So the other one retired that we had. And so, yes, he came in. So, no, I'm not a fan of his. Was not treated well for my decision. And the irony is that I was awarded with a perfect attendance for the principal. And I was covering often for teachers who were vaccinated and testing positive nonstop. So I would go cover on my conference period. But again, on October 15th, for whatever reason, I became a threat to my students and to being on that campus.
That was one conversation when the principal told you that you can't teach anymore?
No, and a lot of the admin didn't know really until we didn't know until that final week. The mandate came out August 13th when the first day back. They waited the first day back. All of a sudden, everyone got the email that said you're going to need to be fully vaccinated by this date. And then, so you were supposed to have an interactive process, a religious, accommodation that was, submitted, and although accepted, you would be removed from the classroom, not allowed to be on site. And there was a lot of uncertainty. There was a lot of everyone has a very different experience too of teachers, custodial, cafeteria, counselors that were removed because they really didn't follow any protocol. It was, I didn't have an interactive process. Some teachers did. But I then, therefore, you waited. The principals didn't know. They were in my room as much, too, saying, so have you heard anything? Do you know what's going to go on? No, I haven't heard anything. They're supposed to respond. I turned in my religious for religious accommodation, blah, blah, blah. And these are awkward conversations. Like, truly, I just wanted to teach. Like, I was happy to be back in the classroom. So it's like to sit here and like have to, like, the principal in your room. So like, you have to get vaccinated. And I'd just be looking at them like, no, I don't. And I'm not. And have to tell them that. But then also be very exposed, because some people really were brainwashed and extremely fearful of those that were unvaccinated and getting sick. So, you don't really know who you were dealing with. You didn't know on campus if there was anyone else that put in for theirs and being rejected or not. And really, even just leading up to that last week of being removed, the principals really and admin did not know exactly how this was all going to go down or what was the deal. And then I think it was that Monday or Tuesday where the principal came in and said, you're going to have to be gone Friday. You're going to have all your stuff out and not return, basically. It'd be trespassing, not to come back on the campus. Turn in your stuff, turn in your keys.
Permanently.
Yes. And then I was like, well, I have a lot of stuff. I've been,
16 years
in that room. And I love transforming my room to whatever we're learning, right? Like, just because of the distant time, but also West Coast versus a lot of our country, right, is born out of the East. And to really know that time and to see those regions and to understand, right, you kind of have to have this visual in your head and a physical experience I totally believe in. So I would try to, turn my room into the Mayflower ship and have them get on board,
Really?
Yes, I have Civil War costumes that I wear, my billboards I was very, proud of, a lot of stuff. So like I'm thinking about and looking about all my stuff of where I'm going to put it in my apartment, how am I going to get it out of here, and how am I going to teach? Because I was insistent that, I'm going to teach every day. It's not as if they said, we're going to give you some time to pack up your room. And then also now everyone knows, right? Because this is what I said. Can I come in on Saturday then to close up my room? No, you got to be out Friday. I can't have the weekend. No. And I said, well, then the students will know. They're going to ask, like, what's going on when they come in my room and everything's torn down, and I'm going to tell them, right? Like, this is what's going on. So.
How did the students react?
Oh, they were upset. Most were pretty upset.
Their age is what, 16 to 18?
Yeah. So I taught 8th graders and then I had one. And so some of them I actually had as 6th graders when we first went into lockdown. So they were so excited to have me as a history teacher and then just to be back in the classroom. And to be learning again. They wanted to do things. Excuse me. I really don't like it when students are exactly used.
For manipulation?
Yeah. And I felt at this point they went through so much that, listen, this is an adult fight. This is my fight. You guys are good. Have a good school year. Enjoy the classroom. And I might be back tomorrow. I might be back next week, and I might not be back, but I'll be good.
But the attendance percentage is one of the ways to evaluate whether a teacher is good or not. If students attend your class, it means they love you.
Well, they had rotating subs, and I would get emails like, will you come back? It's horrible. And I can't read the letters. I get too emotional, but I had some really powerful letters when I left.
How did your colleagues react?
I had some that we were very close, like a family, and some that definitely did not want to either, but for other reasons felt they had to get it. So that was also difficult. There was one other teacher, that refused and was escorted out, and a couple custodial. There were some that were mean. Yeah, a good handful that were, there were some that just didn't say anything. It was kind of like, oh, I went, like, it was just kind of like ignoring that I'm packing up my room or things are going down or turning in things. There were some that were definitely.
They did a great job dividing you, right?
Yeah, they did.
Even amongst colleagues.
Yeah.
They were celebrating. Okay.
Yeah.
What do you do now?
What do I
How did it
do?
all
I'm
turn
still
out?
teaching.
I know that.
Oh,
Congratulations.
yeah. I mean, I've survived. Well, we'll see after this. I mean, who knows? But yeah, I'm teaching remote. So I was removed and then given a position as a reasonable accommodation to teach within remote schools, and I've been there since.
But in LA County, LA District, there is still a mandate to be fully vaccinated to teach
No,
on campus.
that was dropped. Gosh, when did they officially drop that mandate? Just the last school year. Everything's in school years to me, so I
Yes.
apologize when I say last year. It's always school years in my head. So yeah, they reluctantly dropped it, not because of course science, clearly, and we know it wasn't in there because of science, but because they got a big slap it from the Ninth Circuit. And so in part of a strategic of getting the case thrown out, right, and being moot, they moved to drop the mandate. But it wasn't out of the realization that they were wrong or anything like
They
that.
will
So
never admit to that.
yeah, no, I mean, I wasn't, when I was teaching the remote, at one point we were told that we could attend the graduation as a guest, but not as a teacher.
So you'd never had a call with the coming back? Please, Lisa, come back?
No. Now,
Do you think they're too prideful to make that call?
well, positions have been filled. You know, I believe that I should have my rights to return to my position I was removed for. It was, you know, it is a great school. It's a position that's not easily to earn or opens up that often. History jobs are not as available as other positions also. And to be, you know, the district is massive. So people don't realize to get in certain areas are very difficult, or to, you know, so to put myself, to not have the opportunity or not to be given back my rights to the position that I was removed from puts me in a position where I'm forced to then now have to go out and interview to get that position. And we're kind of, you know, honestly, they see that where I'm coming from the remote schools, that I was probably most likely a teacher that refused the vaccine. Plus, you know, I'm a costly teacher. I have 16 years of experience, so you know they can have two new teachers for the price of me, and
Also,
that's
the more you work as a teacher, the more
Yeah.
they pay you, right?
Yeah.
This is the system.
This is the system, and it is, you know, it's unfortunate because I am, I think a really good teacher. Some people might even say an excellent teacher.
We're gonna find out.
Yeah, I don't like to, you know, it's hard for me to boast maybe or brag, but you know, in any other field, schools would be trying to get me. There'd be headhunters saying, right? Like my classroom, I was given more magnet classes because there was such a demand for me.
What's a magnet class?
Gifted magnet. It was a certain school within the broader community school. So ours was what I was teaching in was a gifted magnet. So yeah, you know, but this is the problem when you have, you know, the struggle with education is that the customer's always there, right?
Yes.
You know, and for somewhat.
What about the demand in history? Is it a big demand right now for people? Are they striving to learn?
No, it's terribly treated as a content in education. And I would, you know, 2013 is when they dropped it from the state exams. So
You don't have history in state exam?
no, on 2013, it used to be, California used to use STARS, and Common Core brought in, and in 2013, they went to the CASP testing, and it's just science and math and English. And I shouldn't say just, all very important.
Yeah.
But the irony is that our founders would say that the whole reason why public education should be encouraged is for our future generations, for our posterity, for them to know their civics. And yet it's not and the thing is that does it need to be on that test? No, but once it's not, you know, that's all the focus is math scores, readings, you know, math scores, reading scores, you know, I never have a parent, wonder about their civic scores,
The
unfortunately.
the ones who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it, right?
Yeah, in some ways, you're right. Well, I mean, the one thing that resonates with me is, I was reading Deuteronomy, and just the commandment, really, too. I think I wrote it down. Just as it will not be forgotten in the mouth of the descendants. Knowing how important it is to know your history, right? Because it will be easily forgotten, and then you lose so much of yourself. You lose your identity, right? As a people, you lose your history. You lose, what you learned from your mistakes of the past and what you learned what worked in the past. And I think that's intentional.
Even if you don't know your history, you will be lied to. They will change the history. They will tell you
You're easily
all were
manipulated.
oppressors, bigot, sexist, racist, and etc., which is not true.
Well, I mean, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 said that knowledge, education, and religion is necessary for good government and the happiness of mankind, right? It's all over. Every one of our founders was, the pursuit of happiness was about seeking truth.
Correct.
And COVID and nothing is about seeking truth anymore, right? Like debating, questioning. That was all like put down. And I mean, if you look at Patrick Henry's, if you look at Lincoln's, and even what's Cooper Union's speech, Lincoln's speech. I mean, he was arguing then because Democrats were trying to say that our founders did not want to rid of slavery, right? And that they were not considered in the Declaration of Independence. And I think that's been used to demonize our documents today, to say, oh, this is a document that was meant for white men, and this is a document that wasn't, meant, and it was actually there to keep and preserve slavery. And I sometimes cringe, like, oh my gosh, that same deceit is being embedded in the seeds of our youth, because then they'll destroy that document. They don't care, right? Because they don't think it's for them. But Lincoln was having to debate that same party about that issue and say, absolutely not. You can see over and over and over in policy them making moves to slowly, remove it, not let it grow, not, continue the importation, not let it move westward into territories. It's all over the place. I mean, they had anti-slavery sentiments in the Declaration of Independence, but, they removed it. Clearly, because they just, at that time, needed everyone on board and knew it might cause some controversy. Knew you, of course, would have some people that might not sign it. And, they were taking on, this is where, too, if you remove the context of these documents, you really manipulate and can't appreciate or easily judge, things like that being removed. Well, how can you be stronger? Why would they compromise this in the Constitution?
Because you don't know the context.
Because you don't know the context. And right now there's a real push for equitable grading. And it's also called mastery learning. And, just everything in education is usually the opposite these days when there's trends. Like, restorative justice is no justice. Mastery is no mastery. And it's all about, skill versus knowledge. Pushing the skill. If they know the skill, if they don't need to do all the assignments, just give them, grade them. If they turn in 3 assignments and those 3 assignments are great, well, then they have an A, even though they didn't do 20 of those assignments. But you need to look at the skill you want them to achieve, right? That just really, you cannot have that skill without knowledge. And sure, you can't have that knowledge without skill. So we went way in one direction. And, getting back to the Declaration of Independence is just, to me, it's, again, trying to, as a teacher, your job is to, as a historian, to transport them to a time. And as much as possible, although impossible, like Emerson writes, for one to know the struggles of those who went through the Civil War or the struggle. It's impossible for us to even wrap our mind around that kind of hardship or impossible task that these people were placed in. But you have to try to, and you have to have that knowledge to then therefore understand why at times they had to put certain issues on the back burner to come together. I mean, you had no army, you had no treasury, you had no navy, and you are taking on the mightiest empire of the day, right? 33 colonies around the world. We're the only ones that actually fight and win our independence. And we did it with like nothing, you know? And so when you like hear Patrick Henry's speech and him talk about that, again, they're understanding the end of the Declaration of Independence is as important as that natural rights section of them understanding and appreciating God's providence, right? And understanding that, you know, all things are possible.
Just a short question, yes or no. Do you think the youth of the US is ungrateful right now?
I hate to say they're ungrateful, they just don't know.
So that's why I'm asking. So I believe a lot of Americans, especially the Zoomers, the youngest generation, they don't appreciate the U.S. because they don't understand the country at all. So I was born and raised in Lithuania, lived there for 33 years. So Lithuania is a very small country, former USSR, former communism. We experienced all that, right? In regards to the wars, the whole Europe was shedding blood year after year after year for millennials, right? And at first there was no Lithuania, there were the Baltic tribes, then this, and the other, and Lithuania just evolved in those, I want to say, 1,000 years, right? So the first time Lithuania was mentioned was 1009th year. But the US is the only country in the world that was founded with the purpose. It wasn't evolved. Would you agree with me?
Yeah.
It was built like a company. Would you agree with that as well?
I'm not sure.
In the times where you got in the world monarchs, oppression, the US stood still. You had this constitution, you got this Bill of Rights.
Okay.
You've got this freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom to bear arms. And you stood for the freedom of the world almost as the only place in the entire world. You took, in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, you took everything that you had great from Europe.
Oh, sure.
And you left everything that was bad from Europe, and you
Yeah.
established the country.
Well, we are a nation of dissenters, right?
Yes.
Right. And, you know, they, for the longest time, of course, our founders, you know, they would consider themselves British, right? And generation after generation gets born here and they're thriving. But there was, you know, that Magna Carta of 1215 and a right to a jury, a right to a council of men that make decisions that tax you, that slow chipping away, as you said, I mean, we can't, you know, that's inherited and that was innate in them. So there are things that are innate in us, right? With like our right to own guns and defend our property, our freedom of speech and religion. So I see what you're saying, that like we did take those best things and cherish them and definitely guard them, and then rid of
Monarchy
and stuff. And a lot of times though, that's, you know, I would say because of the Great Awakening. So we had the best, we had the Enlightenment thinkers of Europe influencing so many, and of colonial America. I mean, colonial America was, you know, well read, you know, and that's a big difference. They were it was a highly literate population, even among those that didn't have, you know, economic means. And they, you know, because it was all the Puritans, the separatists, these religious dissenters that came over, was all about making sure you could read the Bible. So what I find it interesting, it was always about from people that like read that for yourself, right? And kind of push back from these established churches that were also very much in bed with governments, right? And this, you know, just think about Luther Martin, right? And the Protestant Reformation and stuff like that. You know, it always leads to you being able to access information and then to, you know, think for yourself. And we, in the colonies, they had that, and they had that among many, right, of not just an aristocratic group that had means to books, right? And then you also had the Great Awakening, which was this religious, I always say it was the nail in the coffin for Great Britain. So, you know, because you're pushing out both. You're pushing out this established government and this religion established that was telling you the king is divine and God has placed him there, and don't question that and don't push back.
Sure, sure.
But then, how can we all be created equal if that king doesn't?
He's more equal
Yeah, it's
than
not
us.
working. And again, we do a disservice in some ways of not understanding how that came out of these separatists and these Puritans that came over, and them reading the Bible and realizing, no, this is not exactly jiving. I don't.
I see a lot of Americans, the youngsters on the internet, that are bashing the U.S. because I believe they don't understand how great a country this is still. Because if the United States of America was a bad country even now, you would not have this amount of immigrants every year, millions and millions. No other countries has this kind of amount of immigrants every year. So it means that the US has something why people strive to come here. This is why I came here, because I was influenced by the culture of the US since I was a little kid. I was watching cartoons from Cartoon Network and all those other channels. I was listening to the American music. I was singing those songs. I was watching the movies and etc. And I always wanted to come here. And I have never understood why did Europeans bow down to monarchs. I still don't understand why people are so obsessed with monarchy. Why the whole world is watching how the Meghan and Harry is getting married, etc. No one elected those people. They have no power over me. I have never casted my vote for those people. And still, 200 years ago and even less, they ruled over the world. They ruled over Canada. They tried to rule over the US. They ruled over Australia, New Zealand, India, and 30-something colonies.
Well, that just makes me think of how when George Washington relinquished command of the Continental Army after winning the American Revolution, never has that ever been done.
He could become a king,
And
right?
King George III said, if he actually does this, because, they are probably hearing across that pond, yeah, they're going to really try to put in this democratic republic.
Oof.
And, no way. But if he does this, that is going to be one of the greatest guys to live. And I just find it such a sad, sad twist how much we demonize him and today with the generations and youth, is that here like we demonize Washington and we put on a pedestal Harry and Meghan, and it is sad. It's a sad downfall to think. And yeah, I mean, if you think it was the great experiment, it still is a great experiment. And just to even imagine the struggles we got to remember these men were in their 20s and in their 30s. Now most are playing video games still, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they launched and wrote the most radical statements of time, planting the seed of that Declaration of Independence.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you can't take that. Sometimes the whole movement in education is to have them look at this document and have no background to it. And you just cannot do that, because you look at that, and at times I even was doing this in this exercise in this class or this professional development, and it was another teacher, not in history, was like, well, duh, reading the natural rights. Well, of course, life and liberty. Like, what's the point? Like, what's so great that they put that in a document? In a sense, it's like, well, you have to understand how radical that was
Back in the day.
Yeah, well, and for every civilization you can think of that. No, humans could be tossed aside. Hey, it's Friday, got nothing to do. Let's go watch some gladiators fight to their death.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go watch someone get convicted and burned on the stake. Like, it was just such a brutal time often, and to have that worth. And so, yeah, I just, getting back to just even how it's again intentional to demonize our founders, because we are a land of immigrants of so many different, we are eclectic. This is why we have so many just within the Christian faith of these different religions, because we are dissenters and so many came here to seek to live their life, and to pursue their happiness, whatever that might be. It's such a eclectic group, it's unique, right? You can't have that anywhere. And yet I think, the one thing that always tied all of them together and throughout time and even to the Civil War was this appreciation for that and this country and our founders and those principles, because that's what Lincoln says in his first inaugural, trying to like plea with the South, like, don't do this to us. Like, remember the mystical chords that tie us together. This Irish German from Minnesota with a terrible Minnesota accent to you, right? Like these mystical chords that will eventually tie us together will be our appreciation and for us being, and why citizenship is important, right? Because we are both U.S. citizens, we'll carry that, right? Your children hopefully will, learn to love and continue that for our future generations.
And not to lose it, not to lose the freedom.
And so
at least to speak.
It's hard to, again, I think a lot of this is extremely intentional to destroy that.
Let's start with the beginning. So when and where does the history of the U.S. start?
Oh, geez. That's a good question. Most would probably say Jamestown. Right.
What year was that?
That's 1607.
What about prior to that? So
the first English colony in the New World to actually survive, right? There was a couple attempts before that. So some might say with the United States, the beginning might start with Jamestown.
But the North America continent was discovered by who? By Columbus or by Vespucci? Because there is a debate, right?
Yeah. So you're getting into exploration and that time period. And so, right, you could just keep on digging all the way back and back and back, right? When it comes to who found the Americas. Christopher Columbus, I always has contributed with that.
1492.
Yeah.
And he's being bashed in the recent years as well, right? They don't want to celebrate the Columbus Day because he was kind of a racist, bigot, sexist, and all those names as well. Right.
Well, yeah, that's what you can just keep on going back. And of course, it's amazing how no matter who they are, even if it's an Italian who's sailing for Spain, right?
Ended up in North America.
Yeah, right. And then how this just, isn't all evil because the United States comes out of that, I don't know.
Why America is called America? Because of the Amerigo Vespucci?
Yes, right. Explorer.
So
and then Vikings, were around these parts too, the Nova Scotia area up there and stuff. So
Nova Scotia is Canada nowadays. Okay, so we're gonna get to Canada because I'm very interested why Canada exists and as a separate country and not the part of the U.S. and etc. and why it differs so much from the U.S. So Columbus goes for the first time to the Northern America. What happens there? Do they settle there or they go back and nothing happens before the first colonizers from Britain go?
Well, you're looking at eventually what will happen is, because this is the era of mercantilism and colonization in the sense of wanting to expand your land for resources, right, to increase your wealth. And gold. That all even goes back to, you could go to the Crusades, right? And Italy starting to thrive with all their spices and trade. And you could just, again, this is what is so cool, and an endless spiral is the cause and effect of history to why anyone would even commission an explorer, right? But then also you had the Protestant and Catholic monarchies going at it. So it was not only about expanding land to really expand your resources for trade, because you had to now be in a global market, right? To maintain a favorable trade and to increase your power as a nation. But then also you had this fight to expand and spread the Protestant versus the Catholic faith. So there's, different motivations there. And then, you have this dominance of Spain for some time. I think from when you think about when 1607 is the first English colony that actually survives and makes it, right? With when Christopher Columbus sails, and then you start having the Spanish conquistadors come over. That's a big chunk of time.
Yes.
And a lot of it was because or a part of that was because people did not mess with the Spaniards. Like you just did not want to, you know, come over where they already said that was their turf. And really, Queen Elizabeth, Henry VIII's daughter, when she defeats that Spanish Armada, it's kind of like,
On this continent.
No, over in Europe, it opens the seaway. People aren't as scared to come over here because Spain basically, I mean, if you landed on the coast of Florida, I think at one point it was a bunch of French Huguenots, and they just chopped off all their heads, put them on a stick, and just basically said,
By Spaniards.
Yeah, you're not welcome here in this land. Like, so, European nations, this is this mighty neighbor next to you, like literally a stone throw away. And Spain was dominating for a while with that. And you just didn't want to go over there and mess with that. And you're kind of always dealing with them in your backyard anyways. So when Queen Elizabeth defeats that Spanish Armada, I think it's because she didn't want to marry the guy of Spain, right, too, when you think of Henry VIII's daughter, which some irony, once again, beheads the mom because she's not a male heir. And then it ends up being this great queen. But she, opens up really the floodway for England to start giving it a shot over here in the New World. You still had to deal, when they came over and set up Jamestown, they were still, hey, go inland. Because you don't want the Spaniards to see you along they've been along the Florida coast then, and let them know you're there. So you still had to deal with concern of that. And then, of course, your natives, and then, of course, just the wild of the area. So there was still some concern from that. But that's kind of, where a lot of early U.S. history, if you're teaching it, kind of begins, is 1607 and Jamestown and that first colony. And then it goes from there. And then after that, you have 1620 Plymouth and the Mayflower, and that's the separatists with strangers on a ship that come over, and they land in the New England area. Jamestown is a southern colony. So it's kind of interesting that you can't, you'll have two extremely different, the first two colonies, different motivations. The Jamestown was to find gold, and it was a bunch of men that came over that originally they were not going to make a permanent settlement, and eventually tobacco is what makes it successful. And they realize, we're not going anywhere and we're staying here. And then really start having families. And then whereas Plymouth, you had your separatists that were being religiously persecuted.
In the UK.
Yes. And so they came over greatly outnumbered on a ship of strangers, landed outside of the charter that they were given permission because of storms. And so, mutiny on that ship almost immediately. The separatists being threatened to be thrown off to their death because they were like these extremist, wackadoo religious people, annoying them, and literally almost were thrown off the ship to their death and taken over. There's no authority, there's no rule over you. You're out of the king's charter. And when you think about Brewster and Bradford and the gentlemen on those ship that were able to convince 100 strangers to come together and self-govern, it's remarkable. And that's your first seed of self-government here, out of necessity. And if you look at that document, how do you think these guys convinced some of these strangers on the ship were criminals? Who knows why they came over, right? Well, they convinced them by saying, we're going to form a civil body politic. And just even that phrase alone, civil, citizens, body, a group of people coming together for the same purpose, to govern. So we're going to form actually a government of us fellow colonists. And when we do that, we're going to make sure that we make good law for everyone, for the general good of the colony. And, it's this promise going back and forth. And in return, we promise to submit, and so you have the first social contract between
to what?
To the law, to the governing body, because they promise to serve and to do good to make moral laws and to do good for the general colony, right? And so you have this very simple but actually powerful agreement between the governed and the governing.
So that was Plymouth.
That was Plymouth.
What about Mayflower? What year was that?
That's Mayflower. That's 1620. That's Mayflower. It's establishes Plymouth.
Oh, so Mayflower is the name of the ship, and
Yeah,
Plymouth is
sorry.
what?
Pardon?
And Plymouth is
Plymouth is the name of the colony.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah.
Okay. How did Swedes arrive to the U.S.? There are a lot of Swedes right now, right? Andersons.
Well, from Minnesota, right? They're all over the place.
Yes.
Well, throughout the U.S. history, I don't know per se when Swedes started coming over and Germans, but really, you had an influx of the Irish with the potato famine. There's different things that were going on. Of course, they settle in areas such as Minnesota and Germany, and Wisconsin, those areas, because they were similar to their land. They knew how to work the land. The weather was similar, so you had the Germans in the Wisconsin area, the Swedes in the Minnesota area and stuff coming over. A specific time, I mean, you have I would say when you're looking at that, you have you have, first of all, an American Revolution. No one's coming over then, right? Then you have trying to launch a new government. The Articles of Confederation, although they had good intentions, was a disaster, our first Constitution, because it put all the power at the states. And then what did you end up having? Just corrupt states, right? And then you pull it in our the second Constitution, the one that guides us today. And so you kind of needed that settled. So you'll have, of course, and even that's part of the debate in the Constitution about banning the importation of slaves. One of the delegates points out, like, listen, cheap labor is going to replace it anyways. It's on its way out. Like, let's not give more reason for people to turn down this Constitution. It's going out, while we become more, basically the point is as we become actually stable in a country and people start learning about us, and we're not this experiment, like this is working out. More people are going to come here to seek, right, better opportunities. And it's not going to be, slavery was an economic institution, and it'll go out on its own. And many times it was dying out on its own. Unfortunately, different things brought it back.
But let's go perspective-wise. So the first were the colonizers or the settlers in Florida and in New England, right?
Virginia is Jamestown, the first English colony. And then Plymouth is the second, 1620. That's that would be that they came over on the Mayflower. That's the separatists that were being religiously persecuted.
What then? What kind of a territory is...
So those are your beginning, and then it just starts booming and grows into 13 colonies, and it's
13 colonies of Great Britain.
Yes, 13 British colonies, which will become the first 13 states, and those they start thriving and growing.
They used to pay taxes to the Queen, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How big of a tax that was?
Not much at all.
A few percent?
Yeah, I think very little for the most part. I used to have those numbers, but that was part of the conflict that happens is that, Great Britain, there was this time of neglect in a sense. Great Britain's like, yeah, we'll give you permission, go over there. All we're going to do, we'll expand resources, more power to you. And then these colonies grow into 13 and they become very successful, rich, thriving, opportunity. They live, they are having larger families over here. They're living longer than those in England, right? They pay very little taxes and yet have beautiful cities. When you go see Boston and Philadelphia, those who came over for Europe were, they were thinking they'd find these little huts and stuff, and were just thrown like, what the heck is this, right?
What an irony with Philadelphia nowadays, huh?
Right. I know, it breaks my heart. But the trade, and what happened is that a couple of things, but big thing is the end of the 7 Years' War and the French and Indian War. So the 7 Years' War was going on between France and England, and Great Britain.
Europe.
Yeah, but then it breaks out everywhere, right? Because if our parents are fighting, we're most likely not going to get along. So the French in the Americas, right, and the British colonies start fighting.
Who were those French in Americas?
They were a lot were in like the Ohio Valley Territory. This is where New Orleans and the French Creole, right? You have them up in that areas in the Louisiana area. Mm-hmm. They were more like Jamestown was in the beginning. Men, fur traders, kind kind of a little bit more nomadic in a sense, not like the British that came over and were really building these beautiful European cities and culture and
They came in with the
communities.
goal to trade.
Yeah, and then so they had, you had French forts. So up on by Niagara Falls, right on Lake Ontario, there's a fort there that was originally a French fort, right? So they'd come down the St. Lawrence River, and then they could go hit in that area with the Great Lakes down the Mississippi. It really was the gateway in, was that area. And so they kind of occupied that for a while in the fur trading. And then, they start just clashing because these British colonies start thriving, growing, and, westward expansion. So they wanted to go past the Appalachian Mountains. And so conflict always happened, and they both had their native allies. So it's the French and Indian War, but it's a smaller war that happens here in the Americas. And it's a part of a bigger picture war that's the 7 Years' War between, And what happened is, Great Britain realized we can beat these guys if we beat them in the Americas. So eventually they started dumping a lot of support for us here, and they were right. So when they defeated the French here, eventually they defeated, and the French was fighting Great Britain with Spain. So Great Britain wins that, but now they have war debt, and so they see, okay, we already have a very heavily taxed people here in England, and their life really stinks in comparison to their fellow British in the Americas, right? I think they're 20% richer. I forget how little the taxes were that they actually had to pay in. But the thing is that they started seeing them as a tax resource, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how they could pay down that war debt. Before, colonies always paid taxes into the crown, but it was always through their colonial assemblies. So when the colonial assemblies, they, some of them kind of said, hey, listen, we don't want to put this tax on this way, or we don't want to pay this in, because, they also contributed troops, and these colonies also paid in, with their own colonial treasuries into the French and Indian War themselves, had debt too, so they just did not exactly agree with the amount of tax.
Mm-hmm.
But really, I think what really becomes the problem is when Great Britain kind of, plus, hey, listen, you can't all of a sudden be a parent, at the age of 16. And that's what Great Britain tried to do.
Somewhere over there.
Yeah, they neglected these colonies and let them do them for quite some time. They would put restrictions on their trade because they wanted to make sure the money stayed within the family. The whole reason why you exist is because for resources, right? You thrive because our British flag is mighty. Mm-hmm. We've defeated empires and defend, and no one messes with your ships because of that British flag, right? You have... the whole reason why as a colony you exist is for your resources in this trade. And then they started getting a little worried and started restricting who you could trade with. Like, oh, okay, the Dutch will let you go on cheaper ships, but no, you're not doing that. This stays within the family, right?
The original sanctions.
Yeah, and then they didn't want them manufacturing. So when the colonies start manufacturing on their own, the relationship was Great Britain had all the natural resources that this eastern coast provides, which is unbelievable when you really think about from the New England climate down to Florida in such a small span of land, the diverse climates, which leads such diverse crops and natural resources, right? It was a gold mine, and it made the colonies rich. It made Great Britain thrive also. But when those colonies started wanting to, continue business or start manufacturing themselves, where they're not buying their manufactured goods back from England, they're like, wait a minute, we got to be a win here too, So there was, little restrictions here and there or things done, but hey, we're over here in the Atlantic. Our parents don't see us, whatevs, we'll just do us. And they still, did them until really the, was it King Charles really started putting some teeth, of course. And then after the French and Indian War, because they truly were in such debt, they started putting teeth behind their axe, right? So when they were restricting trade and then started putting some pretty harsh punishment, that's when there was just no turning back, I think, because the two just never seemed to, Great Britain just never seemed to be able to respect these colonies, but other than seeing them as less than, right? Kind of that European snobbery.
Mm.
And they just, taking a right of your jury and making smugglers be tried in, judges' courts up in Nova Scotia that's not in your land.
Mm-hmm.
And then those judges get a percentage of your cargo if they rule that you're smuggling goods, like, come on, those shady, that just wasn't gonna, little things like that in the Sugar Act. And then you have like the Stamp Act. It's really almost the enforcement of those acts that are quite insulting to the British in America.
Boston Tea Party happens prior to Revolution?
Yes.
What year was that? And what happened there?
Oh,
That's
okay.
what
I'm a terrible history teacher when it comes to dates specifically. I always say you should know ballparks, right? And have a ballpark idea of when that went down. But I'm never, one of those that like drill. There's some that should be burned in your head, like your birthday in 1776, a Magna Carta 1215, things like that. You should have a 1607, 1620. But so what the revolution is 1776, and things really start escalating like the late 1760s. 1770, right, is when you start getting like the Sugar Act. You have the Stamp Act. Those are leading up. So those are acts passed by Great Britain. So the Sugar Act was restricting their trade, right? And then it was not only restricting their trade, but it was setting up special courts if you were caught smuggling. You had to pay a duty, a tax on these imported sugar that you were bringing in, which they would try to sneak in and not pay taxes, is really when we say smuggling, and is to avoid the taxes. And then you would have to face a judge and have your cargo seized. And you were not given a jury of your peers and not tried in courts, right? Mm-hmm. Within the colonies, because they knew that a jury was going to let these guys walk, right? So they purposely, England was starting to do this because they knew in previous that none of their laws were being enforced, right? So they started, like I said, they started putting teeth behind it. The Proclamation of 1763 restricted, after the French and the Indian War, that really actually was a huge misstep, that you had these colonies fight the French and Indian War. You had people die in that war because of conflict that busted out, wanting to go into this Ohio Valley territory, right, for fur trading and stuff. And Great Britain, with the American colonies, wins this. And yet, once we win this, right, you're going to place taxes on me to help pay off the debt. And then you're telling me, what, I can't go into that Ohio Valley territory now and settle it? That's what we fought for. That's now our boundaries. The British territory now goes from the Atlantic to the Mississippi, including that. That's why we fought for that. And now your king is saying, oh yeah, you can't go in there. So people had already purchased land, right? The fur trade was being depleted. They wanted to go in there, right? And they were furious. And not only now were you sending you had Pontiac's rebellion, because of course you had native tribes in that area that were pushing back on the French and the American colonies. And Great Britain felt like we need to keep our Indian allies that are on our side and not make them mad. So stay out of there. And we can't afford the conflict, but yet we're going to still send troops over. But those troops aren't there to like protect you and go into your territory of that you fought for and we fought for in the French and Indian War. They're there to make sure you don't go past those Appalachian Mountains. And so that's when you can just see this different relationship starting to crumble. And they start seeing Great Britain as not one that's there to nurture and posterity, but one that's constantly in the way of that and only putting Great Britain.
And no other king or queen have been... has traveled to the American continent. They were never here, right?
Right.
Why?
I would assume, first of all, again, I just would think that they didn't think it was that important. They had 33 colonies around the world too. And these American colonies were money makers, but it's other than that, I don't think they cared too much about them.
Yeah, but I can understand why they didn't go to, for instance, India, right? It was very far away, other culture, etc. But here in the America, you got your own people, English speakers. Why don't you just visit them and watch how big of a continent this is? The most Western state or territory was what? Texas at that time?
Oh, no. I mean, well, yes, but not part of British territory.
Hmm.
And they weren't there yet. So
British territory was not even Texas.
no.
The mo-
Great Britain's territory in the Americas
Those
is from
13
the
colonies
Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi.
to the Mississippi. Okay.
And it halts there. And so when we earn our independence as a country, that's what we look like as a baby. We are from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi.
Hmm.
And then it's the Louisiana Purchase under Jefferson that doubles our landmass. One of the greatest moves, right? And that takes us to the
Doubles.
Rocky Mountains. Yeah. Doubles. It's like 3 cents an acre. He bought it from Napoleon.
What did he sell?
And Napoleon thankfully didn't have his eyes on us. He wanted, Russia and everything else over in Europe. And so and some people say maybe the slave uprising in Haiti kind of led to like, well, let's just get rid of it. We didn't, the United States did not realize at the time that even the French were claiming that or governing that. They thought it was still under Spanish control. And it was a deal made between Spain and France. So, yeah. And that's a whole nother thing to look at with Jefferson. But, yeah, so that doubled our landmass.
In Texas at that moment, the territory of Texas was controlled by Spaniards,
Yes. Yep.
just like California, etc. Let's go back to Boston Tea Party. What
Yeah.
happened there?
Okay. So
This is the reason why you drink coffee, right? You prefer coffee to tea. Is that correct?
I'll go with that for sure. Yeah, I mean, the Boston Tea Party is probably the escalation of all those things and the Boston Massacre and things going down. The Boston Tea Party, you had the East India Tea Company that had great debt in India. Great Britain was worried about losing their colony there, right? Because if it goes under, employment, upheaval. And
East Indian Company was huge, right?
yeah, it was massive. And
Almost like a separate country.
yeah,
Their
it's
own army they had,
It's
right?
like the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts, right? They were probably quite controlling of government, had a lot of company,
Would you
probably
say-
more money than the government at times. But so there was different acts that were repealed, one of which was the Townsend Act. So there's a lot of different acts that were done and passed by England, and then they would repeal certain elements due to protest, right? So the Stamp Act, you had as acts came into place and Great Britain became more stubborn or put different things to enforce it, right? Of course, the colonies just grew in resistance, and every time that just kind of escalated back and forth and became stronger and stronger and stronger, the resistance, right? And so one of the things that they repealed was the Townsend Act. And partly was because of the Boston Massacre, and they're like, okay, let's. After that shooting, they're like, okay, we'll repeal that act, that Townsend Act, but we're going to keep the Tea Act, and it was to just basically prove a point. And it's interesting to look at these debates in Parliament because not everyone in Parliament supported, what Great Britain was doing at times, and would say like, listen, we're causing this madness with them, and their behavior and the resistance that was rising up in these colonies is because, we're denying them their English rights, like we're causing this. So, it is always interesting too to look at that side of things or to realize that was going on. But the Tea Act remained, and right, Tea Act to them is like coffee to us today. And
What's the Tea Act?
But what it called for is that only the East India Tea Company could sell tea in the Americas. So only Starbucks could sell coffee and it only could be sold by East India Tea Company merchants, and it could only be shipped on that company's ship, where they could get it a lot cheaper from other areas.
Monopoly.
Right. It was a total monopoly. Right. So, our revolution often is taxation without representation is tyranny. And that's, James Otis's rally cry. And it's so true. And there's some other great cries of James Otis, but it was a fight for a free market. It was a fight for understanding, again, going back to Enlightenment, John Locke, and understanding the ownership of property of your business is the only way you're really empowered and free. The minute the government can control that, can take that all away, decides what that is, you're enslaved. You're done for.
Yeah,
Right.
that was all Europe.
That was all Europe. So, like, they understood, it was very principled to them, this idea of being told what they can and cannot sell, or, and, so yeah, it's that. So they purposely plotted and went on that ship and threw millions of dollars of the East India Tea Company's tea into the ocean, destroying it. And King George responded with, "We must master them or leave them for themselves." I mean, there shows you your mindset of a king. We must master them. Like that doesn't work.
Back in the day, monarchy all over Europe, from Spain to Italy. Was it Italy back then, or that was just Florence and all other regions? So it doesn't matter. So from Italy to Spain to Germany to France to Great Britain, monarchs, right? Would you compare back then those monarchs and the system of governance to communism? You had no property. You couldn't do any business. You didn't own anything.
Yeah.
So that was communism.
Right. With the removal of God. That's the only. That's the big difference to me. If you're going to look at that, and that's almost to I think why communism is more bleak than a monarchy, because it's a complete removal of understanding a higher power.
But to me, in those days, the religion or the faith was quasi-religion or quasi-faith. Because how can you read the Bible and not act as it says in the Ten Commandments? How can you get ruled by all those monarchs, kings, and most of them were just terrible human beings? Look at the Leopold II, right? What he did in Congo, what he did in Africa, for an example.
Yeah.
And you can say that these people were Christians, or George V or Carl V wanted to get a divorce. He wanted to divorce his wife. The Vatican said no. So he.
Are you talking about Henry VIII?
Henry VIII.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
You're not a Christian.
I know, but when you see some of Cornwell, him and other people that rose up though against Henry VIII, and within what you would say his cabinet or what have, I mean, they did terrible actions at times in those monarchies and kings, but they always kept it in the veil of at least pretending to be grounded in the faith, right? So like you did have though people that were able to worship. You still had the encouragement of the Bible and the virtues within the Bible that I think in those situations you have a stronger chance of the people thriving or at least rising up, where that I don't know, the complete removal of that and being able to worship is just bleak within communism and that, underground. I think it made it difficult, or with the monarchies that you had at least the teachings of it, although one might be teaching it and not doing it, right? But you had, and then you have to realize you have a time too where a lot of people didn't have access to the Bible themselves. So
they were illiterate.
Yeah, right.
Read.
Most of them. So they, were just taking what the religious leaders were saying in their churches, and so they
were corrupt. The Vatican, right? The popes,
right,
perverts.
The higher up, but there was good,
yes,
yeah,
of course. And then we have Martin Luther.
Right.
That said, enough is enough. That's it.
Right.
We're out of here. Okay, so American Revolution, 1776.
Yeah.
This is when the U.S. starts, right?
Oh, no, this is when the fight starts.
The fight starts.
Yeah. Because, that's when the Declaration of Independence is signed, the treasonist. Right? It was a hit list. It was a hit list, those guys and their wives. Wives' signature was implied within their husbands. The wives were as much in support of this. I mean, Abigail Adams is melting silverware, and putting them into bullets to defend at home and holding down the fort at Braintree and that farm. I mean, so it should not
Silver
lost
medalist.
that these were, they knew that they would be targeted. Some of these women were targeted, and oh gosh, I forget one of the signers' wives was kept in the outside elements in a cage, and captured. They, had some of their families completely wiped out, and they were not ignorant. They knew that this was going to bring down the full force of the empire of Great Britain, and Great Britain has always been extremely ruthless to that, to make an example. So, there's a personal letter John Adams is writing with someone reminiscing about that moment of signing the Declaration of Independence, and how, like, you could hear a pin drop. So it's hard for us to imagine. Again, it's an exceptional story. The United States is a constant exceptional story, that it just defies everything, us winning that war, but just that you'd have men. If you look at Crane Britton, who's an expert on revolutions, it usually rises up because people are in a life of despair, because they can't improve their lot in life, right? Because the government is so corrupt and taxes are so high, that, that it's just, what else, right? And to rise up and revolt. You have nothing left to lose. These men had everything to lose. They lived better than monarchies. They had fortune, they had honor, and just think about how all their names would be shamed if they lost this, right? And that honor and name was so important then. And they had it all to lose, and they did it for really what was a small scale of taxes when we think about how we're taxed today.
One digit.
But a lot of principles there of self-government. Yeah, it was like something like 2%, wasn't it? Or something ridiculous when we think about how much we're taxed today. But yeah, it's a powerful moment. It's not an easy moment for these men either to come to. They loved their British heritage. Benjamin Franklin, when he was berated in Parliament towards the end, he was over there trying to always make these two sides amend these disagreements. And as an ambassador for the colonies, a bunch of stuff went down, and he had to go into Parliament and basically stood there while they berated him for hours. And he left in tears, like, basically, I came in as a British citizen and I left as an American. Yeah. So, it's like, this was not an easy move for them. John Adams, his cousin Samuel Adams was fiery. He was doing things that, John Adams is like, that's not right. Like, we're not towering and feathering, we shouldn't be doing things. There were some things that, at times, Adams did not like, but Adams, kept on trying to hope that they would see us. They sent back the olive branch petition. These men kept on pleading with Great Britain, just hear us out. All we're asking is for our English rights, representation, self-government, taxes to be decided among the people who live in the land, And I think for John Adams, he defended those British troops and was able to convince that jury of Bostonians that those troops were not guilty, and of killing those Bostonians that were charging them. It was like 300 that eventually surround, I think, around 8 soldiers, right? Things were said, things were exchanged, and shots were fired, and it escalated. But the fact that those troops were not hanged at that point. Boston was heavily military occupied. There was unbelievable tensions between that. And to think that they still were able to have a just court, right? And that all the public and the mob mentality and the shouts and the cries, that evidence was brought in, right? Testimony was given by people of color too, and that they had a jury that found them not guilty. And, Adams felt that that was the most important contribution he did to our country. Not being president, not being an ambassador and getting money and foreign countries to help our revolution, but defending those troops. And so he was most offended when Great Britain was starting in a lot of those acts to remove their right to try soldiers that did crimes. Because you have to understand, a lot of the British soldiers that were sent over forced to quarter in your home if they would not house them. They were 17, 18-year-olds. A lot of them were criminal. They'd empty out their jails. They just needed bodies in their army. They were given alcohol. Like, hey, listen, you want join the army and you'll have endless booze. This is what was like all over Great Britain when it came to those foot soldiers. And so when crimes were done, one of the things that was outrageous to them after the Boston Tea Party was the intolerable acts, was the propaganda that the colonies said. And those were the coercive acts of King George's idea of we must master them or leave them themselves. And one of those things was completely shutting down the ports of Boston, which, Boston is a major harbor that's like completely shutting down always in and out of LA, right? And commerce, and just basically starving the people until they pay back for the damaged tea. All like any crimes done by soldiers in there. And again, I think it was a soldier for every 10 citizen living in Boston would be tried back in Britain. And, that was such an insult to Adams after he felt like, and again, it was an example that Great Britain just will never see us as equal. They will not see us as equal British citizens here and respect us.
So the founding fathers, who were they and how many of them there were?
Oh, well, I mean, you have that's a tough one because there's so many that I would hate to, there's, so many that, the big ones you would say with George Washington, of course, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. You'd have to say John Hancock. Gosh, this is like Benjamin Franklin, Patrick Henry, Alexander Hamilton, would be in a thought there. You'd have, but you have like James Otis. You have many that Prescott, who dies at Bunker Hill. Some that don't make it, so then their name doesn't stretch as far, or maybe didn't have a chance to be as much of an influence within our establishment. We're definitely the seeds, but the list could go on.
But the founding fathers led the states to defeat the Great Britain and sign the Constitution. Independence of the Declaration of Independence.
So there's like 50 some that signed the Declaration of Independence.
And they're all called the Founding Fathers?
They should be, right?
Okay,
and
gotcha.
you know what? You used to, in our education, you used to have to know all the signers' names and catch this, their wives' names.
Okay,
you're right. Like people always try to act like it's like, no, they respected those women. They knew.
Here's a question to you. Would you name right now all the 50 states? States.
Yeah, I know. I'm terrible. That is not my world.
And they had to learn all
their names.
And their wives' names.
I know.
That's too much.
I know. Well, and there's something to be said about, it is sad how many of them are forgotten and their names aren't, I go down, and the irony, if you go see the Declaration of Independence that's in the archives, it's just a breathtaking document to see in person. But the irony is that really the only name that remains that's visible for the most part, there's faint, is John Hancock's. But, even some of those big names today, I would say, many of us just don't know their story. And to me, that's always almost more important, is to know their story and who they were.
So you got this independence from Great Britain. What happens in Canada?
Yeah, what happens in Canada?
What do they do in the 18th century?
Well,
they're ruled by French?
Yeah, I don't know much about Canada's history, but it is interesting how, in the War of 1812, the United States actually, so the War of 1812, think about that. That's not too long after the United States. We're at war again with Great Britain, and Great Britain's trying to take us over again. But there were some battles up in Canada, and, we were kind of thinking of swooping down and taking some of that, or swooping up, may I say, and taking some of Canada, but it was a miserable, unsuccessful. I forget what fort it is up in Canada that they tried to seize in the War of 1812. Unfortunately for Canada, right? But they.
So Trump said a few days ago.
I know, I laugh. I always say, they're always
governor of the 51st state.
Wouldn't you, if you lived above the best party in the world and never got invited, wouldn't you be bugged?
Wouldn't you agree that Canada was great 20 years ago, even 15 years ago? But once the great
Not as great as us,
Justin
though.
Trudeau took over, that became a shithole.
Well, it's scary how much damage one person can
And
do.
in 8 years? He's elected for 5 years, I won't say. That's his last term. He was elected in 2015. Yes. So in 9 years, he almost demolished the country. If anyone of you Canadians
Well,
are
I
watching,
mean,
just
can't we
comment below.
relate here? I mean,
4 more years of that? Ooh.
President Obama and that presidency did a lot of damage, and I would argue is probably still behind a lot of the damage that's going on or trying to. I think there's there were some quotes I was looking at with like Lincoln, and I just thought it was interesting. And again, in his first inaugural speech of him talking about, those who are not patriots. Like I'm not talking to you, like to plea about these chords that we share, because unfortunately, I think throughout history too, there was some people that do not love this country and have goodwill towards it, and get in positions of power and do not respect its principles and its foundation, and do not like the people being masters to the people. I mean, Lincoln even talks about that the American people are his master. Washington's a humble servant. It was really embedded as this act of service to country and as a leader, as a politician, and that's so lost, right? In a lot of ways, they think we serve them. It's very little of that. They make gazillions. Most of our founders left their positions in politics broke. You paid out of pocket for most of your stuff. If you're having a party at the White House, you paid for it, not the taxpayers.
Because you want to have a party.
Pardon?
Because they want to have a party.
Yeah, it's like
I'm not invited.
Now it's when we see what Pelosi and Biden and it's not just Democrats come out of Congress, making it's.
And you just know of how much don't you know about their money?
Yeah.
If they're worth 100 million, do you think that's it? I don't think they're worth 100 million.
Yeah.
If you have 100 million of white dollars, I believe you've got billions somewhere else. And it's laughable. Pelosi is the best investor of all times. She made 100 million in a few years. She's just amazing at predicting the market. No one bats an eye.
Hey, it's the root of all evil. It's sometimes you just think about things being so evil, and at times too, like I think about so cruel, which is going back to how many, and what bothered me most is how our military was treated. And I just pray that truly those soldiers, in our military, get their position back with their back pay, and actually are the ones that are promoted up within our military will be one of the best things to happen for this country and to secure its blessings. But there's many different motives behind it, but it's unbelievable to me how you can look at someone who's served in Afghanistan or other things, and you have no problem that you're destroying their lives. And it's like pharmaceutical money behind it, or it all boils down to money and power. Always does. And it's just sometimes you can't believe it. Like, really, this is all about, and how much money does one need? Like, you really okay with selling your soul to the devil, or looking at this person who's getting denied treatment, or a transplant because they refused the vaccine, and now those kids don't have a father. I mean, things like that happened, and they want to forget. They want you to forget it. This is what is just so disturbing, is how quick our memory leaves us, right? And how much it's just they want you to forget. They don't want you to know the good things about these founders in the country. They always focus on the bad, and it's purposeful. And it's a lot of times just has to deal with money and power. Lord Acton was a great admirer of our Constitution. It's often said, power has a tendency to corrupt, but absolute power will absolutely corrupt. Mm-hmm. And you can just see the lack of respect for. I think once that's what I was listening to a conversation of. I don't know if he was a senator at the time, but Obama said that he believed the Constitution limits the government's power too much. I was like, what? Like to me, that should be. How can that even come out? Like you might think that, but how did that come out of your mouth? And that's okay, and people aren't just like, okay, that alone, you're out, done. Because that's
That's the whole point.
that's the whole point of the document. Like, so, and again, if you have a people that forget and don't know, they don't see these things that are eye-opening.
Constitution, when it was written, and by who?
Okay, so you're looking at, you have the American Revolution, the Treaty of Paris is signed, where we finally earn our independence or acknowledged to be free and independent. And then I think I actually even wrote those down. I think it's 1787 is when the Constitution is signed. So it's only 7 years, or that when the Constitution is created and debated, it's only 7 years after we become a nation that we're governed under the Articles of Confederation, and it's such a train wreck. So or is it 17? Let me look, because I don't want to. Yeah, so 1787. 1778 is the Articles of Confederation. So like you're looking at, a very brief time, and that Articles is a train wreck. And James Madison has been quietly on his own drawing up the blueprints of the Constitution. He's read hundreds of books of government. He borrowed much of Jefferson's personal library, and actually that's Jefferson donated to our Library of Congress. At that heart and that seat is Jefferson's personal library. He was reading that, he was designing it, and he was trying to plead with people to like realize, listen, we have a problem here. We have to rethink this. This isn't working. And they tried to meet, and it just blew up. No one wanted it. And it was Shays' Rebellion. Daniel Shay was a war vet. He served at Bunker Hill. So that means he served and survived all 7 years of that war. Marquis de Lafayette gave him his sword. That must have been a phenomenal service. Marquis de Lafayette is the French nobility that came over, and he so loved what this country was about and fighting for, that he came over without the king's permission of France way before, and was, donated his own money at the age of 18 and was like leading, armies and helping our cause. He gave Daniel Shay this sword, and Daniel Shay and his returns, right? And he's a Massachusetts farmer, and the farmers are getting unbelievably taxed, and the city politicians don't care, right? And these
Nothing
state
under the
governments are so corrupt and so powerful that what the saddest thing is to think of is that a lot of these soldiers had yet to be paid for their service, because we were broke. We were broke before the war, during, and after, right? They never were paid. This man, Daniel Shay, served for 7 years. And if you couldn't pay your taxes that were being placed by these corrupt state governments and fat cats in the state governing bodies, you were losing your farm. And the worst thing is that not only did you lose your farm, you had to go to debtor jail. And then if you didn't own land, you couldn't vote. So here's these guys. I mean, could you imagine your frustration and anger? I mean, some of these soldiers fought without shoes. They were so ill supplied at times.
Literally, without shoes.
Literally, that's after December. So we declare our independence in December of that first year of the war. Only a few months, really, maybe 4 months, 5 months into it, and I think Washington had at that point 3,000 troops left. And when they were fleeing New York, they were fleeing, and the British were tracking them down in blood in the snow because they didn't have shoes. Most of them didn't even have bullets. And so the best generals were being sent back to England because they like, this is done. We'll just wait till the river freezes and we'll march over and slaughter them, right? They were camped out on one side. He's just waiting to see who even gets out of New York, all right, as they're fleeing. It was the largest naval invasion until Normandy was the British, when they sent their full fleet over to knock out Washington. They had one success in Boston and getting them out, and then Britain came over with its full force and sent their Hessians, which is like their elite killing force, right, within the army. And, Washington does that unbelievable the crossing the Delaware to surprise them on Christmas, knowing that they wouldn't expect it and thinking that he's going to surrender shortly. And, from there on, it's, never as in bad conditions, but bad. I mean, and just the beginning, but an unbelievable, again, just would not give up. There is not an option for Washington. There was not an option of surrender. But when you getting back to James Madison and the Constitution, he's sitting there pleading with them to see this corruption, right? Each state was running like its own country. They were negotiating with foreign countries on their own. We still had British warships in our land. Great Britain's like messing with our ships overseas. We're millions and millions in dollars of debt to countries that helped us. To the treaty, we had to pay back Great Britain. They're like, why would we remove our ships? You haven't paid back our money. You haven't given loyalists back their property that they lost with the war. We're not doing anything. Who does it benefit, right? Like, we're going to just block you. You can't trade. You can't do anything. And, the federal government at that time was just a shell with no power, right? It was a Congress. It was one representative, I think one, maybe two, per state, 13 states at that time. They had no power to do anything or enforce anything among the states. Everything had to go through the states. Even federal laws had to go through the states. Amendments had to be approved by all 13. Like it was just all the power was given at the states, and therefore the states become corrupt. They become selfish too. They're not going to pay in. We have more stuff to do in our state to clean up, blah, blah, blah. And, Madison sees this, and you also have turmoil. You have this unjust farmers losing their land and going debtor jail and losing their right to vote. And that rebellion is finally what made Washington say, okay, because he was in retirement, right? This poor guy. He's been away fighting this war, doing the impossible. Mm-hmm. And he at first was like, I'm not coming. Listen, I did what I did. It's now you guys got to pick up the ball. And he's like, okay, after Shays' rebellion, it made political leaders realize, okay, we might need to come and look at some things. And they came under the false idea that they were just going to tweak a few things of the Articles of Confederation. And Madison and Edmund Randolph, who was a prominent person, governor of Virginia, presents the Virginia Plan. And they present it on this idea that they're going to just abolish a few things of the Articles and add a few powers to it. But really what it calls for is a complete, getting rid of the Articles. And that's like even the first hurdle when these delegates showed up in Philadelphia. And a lot of them only showed up because Washington agreed to come, because then people trusted it. That's how much, and they knew they needed him there, because once you roll this back out, because this is done behind closed doors in secret. So you need to have this, and rightfully so, very jaded, questioning what's going on in there, seeing the turmoil. Are we going to put an aristocratic group back in office? Is that what's going on? Even Patrick Henry said, I'm not going. I smell a rat in Philadelphia, and it smells like tyranny. Right. This is a guy that, like, these are your best buddies. If he didn't trust what they were up to, what would the general farmer, right, think of what's going on here? And so it's remarkable. The convention itself is so important. The arguments in it and what goes down. You could spend months in a classroom, and unfortunately, it barely gets a week half the time. Of looking at that design and the arguing and the compromising to what really comes out with compromise are some of, I think, the most beautiful aspects that has allowed it to serve us for over 200 years. It's the most living constitution in the world's history as a framework, a written constitution for a federal government.
Are there any mentions in the Constitution that you can't change the Constitution?
No, they know they needed it to change, because that was the problem with the Articles of Confederation. When they realized they needed to tweak a few things with it, the Articles needed 13 out of the 13 states to approve it. And it makes sense why you do that, because you would ensure it was good. But what they did is that they empowered one state to have all the power, right? Because if one state says no, then nothing happens. And that was always Rhode Island. Don't ask me why. I don't know why. But Rhode Island is unique that way, and always would vote things down. So they knew they needed an amending process to it, that they couldn't see all the needs. And again, if this was going to last for the times, it's going to have to serve the times. They can't see everything that would be needed, but it's not meant to be easy. It's not easy easily done, not easily amended, but it is possible. There is the amendment process that is in our Constitution, and hence our Bill of Rights wouldn't exist.
Yeah, but once you sign the Constitution of the United States of America, you can't change the Constitution, right?
Amendment is changing the Constitution. So when you make an amendment to the Constitution, it is changing the Constitution.
What was the last amendment that was made?
Oh, I don't know, but I can tell you the first 10, it was our Bill of Rights.
Yes.
Right?
But it was, I mean...
There's only been 27 amendments to the Constitution. So if you think over 200 years, that's not much. And if you minus the first 10, that's your Bill of Rights. That was immediately added on as an agreement to try to get those who were did not like this new strong federal government to agree to it. The Anti-Federalists, George Mason and Patrick Henry, others like that. Once the Federalists agreed to say, hey, listen, if you approve this in those state conventions, we will add a Bill of Rights to this. And so,
but for instance, right now, the president of the U.S., can he change a constitution? Can he?
It's a 2/3 vote in Congress. It has to be a 2/3 vote in the House and the Senate, or there's an option for state conventions. But I don't know if there's ever been a state convention that. And how that works, it is possible that the states can amend the Constitution. So, like, if you wanted to put in term limits. Right? Well, do you really think these people in Congress are going to put a term limit on themselves, or like maybe that will take state conventions, the people to do it. But there is a process in the amendment or in the Constitution of how to amend it, how to change the Constitution if need be. It shouldn't be taken lightly. It's not done easily, and so again, Congress is the one that proposes and votes on those amendments. But it is, and you know what's a great movie is Lincoln. The movie Lincoln is really all about it's all about the 13th Amendment being passed that banishes slavery from our land. So, and that's just really looking at the maneuvering that needed to be done to get that through. But yeah, or it can be done through state conventions.
So, for example, if you have a majority in Congress and the president of the same party, you can pass, for instance, an ability to vote if you're not a citizen. It's possible.
If you as amending it or a legislature?
Amending it.
I guess that would be possible. I just can't imagine, although that you would. Yeah, so it's a 2/3 in both houses.
In both houses. So you have to control.
If not more,
the Senate,
yeah.
The House.
Now I'm getting nervous. I think it's a 2/3 in both. I mean, I know it's a pretty high standard to get. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, all things are possible, right? But I'd hope to think that could never be.
At the time where the Constitution was written, was there some similar documents in the whole world? Or it was like brand new, nothing like this?
Brand new, nothing like it. I mean, Madison... now here is the thing: the only states had their constitutions, right? And Massachusetts Constitution was 10 years younger than our federal Constitution, and John Adams wrote that in 2 weeks. And so you have your state constitutions and stuff, but there were things within the states, but I would argue what's like with the Electoral College, for example, the proportional representation and equal representation, that's called the Great Compromise, right? That is a great that is the biggest fight that lasts throughout the whole convention, and almost just with barely finally does Madison agree to it, really, and others. He thought too he was failing in some ways by compromising on the issue, but they almost did not were unable to actually walk out with a constitution, which would have been the destruction of our country. It would have been just a forgotten little thing in history. But that compromise and finally compromising on equal and proportional representation, I think, is probably one of the more beautiful things to the Constitution, why it's lasted. And it leads its way to understanding a bit of the electoral and it's the understanding that we are a republic with democratic virtues. Mm-hmm. It is not one or the other, right?
So at the time when the U.S. Constitution was signed, this was the first constitution in the world. No other countries had any.
Not they had constitutions. Like
Were they
Great
called
Britain's,
constitution?
Great Britain's, a lot of it is tradition too. Some is written and unwritten. It's like an adaptation with Parliament and stuff. But I would say that I guess you had you had your Republic of Rome. You had your democracy of Greece. You had those civilizations and then other countries, but to have one that I would say there is no, and maybe I can be wrong. Don't let anyone know that. But there is no constitution I know of that starts out "We the people." Like that is so powerful, and I don't think too that we understand how powerful that is. We see it, we splash it everywhere. It's on T-shirts, but it is just and Madison, and this was important to Madison that it was "We the people." This is why the ratification process is in the Constitution on how to officially approve this. They could have rolled it out and said, "Here we go," but Madison said no. How much these individuals, men and women, truly wanted this to be a government of the people, by the people, for the people is just, to me, remarkable that it was so embedded in them. It's like so much that it's everywhere. And that they, started this document out because, such arrogance a lot of times, and rightfully so, in some of these people and their, success and their brilliance and stuff, but that they really wanted the average citizen, the farmer, and a lot of our founders were farmers. They were teachers. They didn't. And actually, that's what they would more so hang their hat on than being a politician, right? And it's so opposite today of what we respect and what one we want to be attached to as our identity of what we do, right? But they, I think that ratification process required 9 out of 13 states to approve it, but Madison really wanted 13 out of 13, and that's what they shot for. That's what they eventually got with with saying, "Hey, we'll add the Bill of Rights." They eventually got Virginia was the big holdout, and they knew if they didn't get Virginia, they had the votes, meaning the states that approved it, but Virginia was your highest populated state at the time. And so if you approve a constitution with the 9 out of 13, but you don't have the state, right? So there was a lot there too of understanding too that if you are going to launch this, and we're struggling as a country. This is again a great experiment. If we're going to do this, we need everyone on board, and we need to make them feel a part of it, and to agree with it and to understand it. Hence the Federalist Papers and bringing these debates and having a convention where we unfold and discuss and argue and look at this.
Short question before the long one. Do you think the U.S. went off the rails in the recent, let's say, 100 years, in the recent century?
Yeah.
In the 1960s, correct me if I'm wrong, in the 1950s, 60s, maybe even 70s, in a household, a father, a male, could work and provide for the whole family. Children, 2, 3, 4 children, wife would be a housewife, and he could provide a house, food, maybe even car, and some kind of vacation. Could he?
A win in the 50s?
50s,
yeah.
60s.
Yeah.
Why it's not possible for the last 20 plus years?
Loans.
2 of them, both father and mother have to work, and they don't get their ends meet.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of things probably behind that. There was a time where, like when my parents started out, there was no such thing as credit cards. And
you want to tell me that they were buying houses by?
So that's about the only thing you would have a loan out was a house back in their day. There weren't, and I think partly when women started to work in the workplace and banks realized we have 2 incomes, you could have larger prices, ticket prices on these homes and mortgages and larger debt. right? Then therefore, and I think that's a big a part of it. You know, you're not gonna. It's kind of how college is, when this idea that everyone must go to college, when college is not for everyone.
And the pricing is ridiculous.
Right,
For a European,
right,
it's
because
ridiculous.
it's subsidized, right? And it's these government loans. So if a college knows, you know, you can't pay, you know, this is like marketing 101. You have to look at what the people are willing to pay, so they have to see a worth in it, what they have means to pay. You can't price something out of business is what you would do, but by getting constant bank loans, and you know, it's allowed these the housing market,
And at the same time,
college education
they sit
to
on the
become, and
money.
sadly, it's like unreachable because you're just graduate in debt and tons of debt, or it's almost impossible to own a home.
And colleges themselves, they sit on a pile of money on billions of dollars. I want to say Harvard has dozens of billions of dollars in their bank accounts. They still charge, I want to say, minimum $50,000 a year. American dream was possible up to the 90s, I want to say. Right now, I don't, from the people that I know here, I'm only here for 18 months in the US. Let's say I know 100 Americans, right? I want to say 90 to 95 of them, they do not own, they rent. That wasn't the thing back then in the 60s. Almost everybody owned. Even
Yeah.
here in California.
Well, just
There is
even driving here, I was looking around at all the huge apartment complexes,
huge.
massive.
You can't.
And I'm sitting there thinking, who is living in these? And they're not cheap, some of the, you know, too, either. And that's
Who
where,
owns
so you
them?
can't even, it's not even like, okay, I'm going to rent and save for a while to buy a place. Rent's so high. It's like, maybe my more jaded perspective on things. Sometimes I just feel it's all intentional because once again, if you go back to, community, you go back to Lexington and Concord and those farmers that shot that first shot. I mean, again, talk about a moment in time of bravery of these men that had no skill and facing up to this polished army marching down your street and hearing them come well in advance as they come to meet and take your land, your home. And these are, you know, there's a connection to that. Your heritage, your father's, this is my father's home. You know, I think we're losing that. And then we're losing our will to feel connected to the country and to fight for things too.
You own nothing. You
No,
own
and
loans.
your government feeds your kids breakfast in the classroom. You know, like everything is government provided. Father can leave then because, you know, government will provide.
What's America's, by saying America, I mean the US. What's America's relationship with communism? You had the Communist Party in the 50s to 60s. Would you say they're just, Communist Party is here still in the US, but they're just hiding?
Well, I think they relabel, you know, and then some go with more Marxist, but yeah, I mean, so I recently went to that Reagan movie, and it's, you know, the parallels at times when you look at history at many different things, but you're just like, gosh, you know, Hollywood and the communists and the propaganda and things that were coming,
Unions.
unions. How, you know,
40
little,
years
if
ago.
only, yeah, and you could see the fight then. So yeah, I don't. You can look at, of course, a lot with World War I and World War II when you see a stronghold on it. Now, I will have to say that my my niche, my passion is early U.S. history, colonial to the Civil War, like on a personal level. Like I'm one that's most happy if I'm traveling to Civil War battlefields, you know, everything is full circle. I can bring it back to that 1800 time period, a little nutty that way. And so I'm not as strong in the, you know, later on, although my father is the youngest of 9, he's 85. So I had 4 uncles that served in World War II.
9.
And a pastor, and served, you know, had his church in Chicago during the Great Depression,
Oh, wow.
and raised 9 kids, right? So, I mean, you know, I don't, you can look at, of course, a lot with World War I and World War II when you see a stronghold on it. Now, I will have to say that my my niche, my passion is early U.S. history, colonial to the Civil, actually Civil War, like on a personal level. Like I'm one that's most happy if I'm traveling to Civil War battlefields, you know, everything is full circle. I can bring it back to that 1800 time period, a little nutty that way. so I have always grown up, I think part of just always appreciating this country and its history and being raised around my cousins and just having that rich connection of generation and hearing stories being told, of being, just them jesting each other and talking about, football, basketball games, or just hearing them come home from war. My Uncle Paul did not come home. So, I know that time period, and I know it, and I hear often. I was raised in a family that religion and politics were always discussed at the table at gatherings, I know that they believe a lot of communism and communists taken in control of Roosevelt were in his cabinet, and we could see them flee afterwards, and then Nixon, as a senator, was making accusations of that and kind of poo-pooed, and sadly not until actually his death, I believe, is when the FBI released documents, and basically ones that he was accusing within our government of being spies for communist countries were, and it was revealed he was right. So, it kind of makes you understand a little bit about
how he was smeared and removed from
well,
office.
now we understand, the corruption within, and knowing, there were not people that were there because they love our country, but they're there because they wanted to destroy it and put something else in place.
But communism is such a disease that it infects people, and they're willing to destroy everything that they have, what they see. They just don't care. It's not even a religion, it's a cult. It's basically a cult, because every time when communism touches the country, it destroys it from within. And you can't name me even a single country that has implemented communism and is happy.
Wasn't like Russians had a better life under the Tsar than they did under communism? I mean, not to say there wasn't wrong, but I mean, I think when that was taken over, it was even more ruthless, right?
Well, they definitely didn't kill each other. They didn't have the civil war prior to having a Tsar. But everything that happened afterwards, and Lenin, how they worshipped him, then
Right.
Stalin, and even knowing that Stalin did those heinous acts for his own people, they still worshipped him. They had Stalin's photos prior to that, Lenin's and Stalin's photos in every classroom. They worshipped them. And the same thing happened in China. The same thing happened in Chinese killed up to 50 plus million of their own, right? They were, after the Cultural Revolution, the Communist Revolution, they were killing each other. Russians killed Russians, Chinese killed Chinese, Khmer Rouge in Cambodia killed Cambodians. It's always the same thing. But we're still kind of rooting for equality, right? And now we're not saying communists, we're not saying Marxists, we're saying socialists. You like socialism? Just take a look at Argentina, right? Prior to Javier Milei taking over the power, Argentina was down for a whole century. And prior to that, a century ago, Argentina was top 5, top 10 countries in the world. But then socialists arrived and they demolished the country.
They know not what they do. That's getting all things back to, I think it's a very much one of the, biggest mistakes and where we lose it is the primary and secondary education, because they are so, they do not see the red flags, the warning. They do not know the destruction. Mao, the deaths that are under these, they don't have any history to any depth to understand how wicked life is under communism or socialism, and how unbelievable twisted it is to demonize these documents, this country, the Constitution, right?
If not those documents, they would bow to King Charles.
Right. Well, I mean, one of the things during the summer of BLM protests was they threw paint in Boston on a beautiful placard statue, a thing of Shaw, who led the 54th Massachusetts, which was the first African-American regiment in the Civil War. And it's just like, Again, they know not what they do. And that's purposeful, because then you can have them do things like that because they just have no clue. They're just weaponized. The youth. Isn't that always how it works? And this is what, concerns me. Because it's concerns me because it's so hurtful, and I can see it in my span of teaching of like killing the joy. It just cracks me up. It's always the opposite of what they say. It's like, there used to be so much joy in teaching when I started, and my content. I just couldn't even. People were like, "Oh, you should move up to high school." I'm like, I just loved it because I loved my content, and I just loved the fun of teaching it, and I always have them write a letter at the end of the school year to the next students and next year's students. And, I always was just like, okay, good, I got one, when they would say, what did they learn? Or, and when they talked about it, just how, this exceptional story of the United States, or I never knew I just love U.S. history, just anything that sparks them to want to learn more about their country was my goal, and to appreciate it. And its flaws, its imperfections, its wrongs at time, but also its exceptional story. Because, we're going to all need forgiveness at one point. Every day I do. So I don't understand, there's just this constant of always pushing the negativity of everything. And the ugliness of everything is just, you can just see it in the classroom. It's just unhappy. Students depressed. I'd be depressed if that's my roots, my background, right? Like, it's just, and then you see it now unfolding on college campuses, and it's a different thing every time now, right? But yet it's the same. It's just this weaponizing of irrational, angry
emotions.
And then to destroy these beautiful buildings and these halls, the history of these campuses too, like Harvard and Stanford and Princeton. The people and the individuals that walked it, these statues and stuff, it's just mind blowing to me.
You did not build it. Don't touch it.
Right. And just how can you not taking down in front of the Met with that beautiful of Theodore Roosevelt on his horses in front of the museum in New York. Like it just pains me. It really pains me to have watched that and to see that, or the melting of Robert E. Lee's statue. And it's, I just feel, because I see the evil behind it. It's no good intentions. And even if, I can go to Rome and look at certain statues, and those were some wicked rulers at times, but I could appreciate that sculpture and that design, and being able to do that with stone, like just the lack of appreciation for the arts too, is, I almost think, purposeful.
Listen, they don't appreciate the art, so we're not even touching how they don't appreciate the country.
Right.
If I see lots of youngsters on the internet, especially on Instagram and other socials, they just don't love the country. I would recommend them just to go to Europe, any Europe country, for a month. They will come back appreciating America. They will find out in a week or two why America is greater than any country in Europe, especially now with all the migrant crisis, London being the stabbing capital of the world, being Berlin and the other German cities being straight up Muslim, with all the marches, Allahu Akbar, always screaming and chanting. With all that they're going to see in Europe, they will appreciate America even more. Just go there and experience it on their own. Europe is great, but once you go to the US, you understand the level of greatness, especially once you understand the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and everything that you have here, and you almost lost it.
Yeah.
It's lunacy to me. How can people not appreciate what you have?
Gratitude. It has to be taught in a conscious decision. It's all, our nature is often to be ungrateful. And, you just look around and it's always the haves, the have-nots. And there's no appreciation for hard work and just enjoying the fruits of your labor.
Yeah,
And said it's for some reason you think you have the right to
give it
right?
to me.
And like for some reason you're all deserving of something.
It's like the same thing that happened during the BLM. They were protesting for the equality, right? Anti-racism, but they were looting the shop, the stores. It has nothing to do with equality.
Right.
And you were looting, you were destroying your own community's businesses. How many black businesses were destroyed? They don't care. They have no idea what they're doing. They're just being manipulated and being led to destroy
Used.
everything they see.
Used. Yeah. It's sad.
Lisa, the last question on my podcast is always the same. Let's have two assumptions with you. Assumption number one is the position of the President of the United States of America is the most powerful in the world, right? If you're the President of the US, you're the most powerful human being on planet Earth. Assumption number two, you become one. You become the President of the US.
Oh, no.
Once you do so, you got all those secret services that come to you and say, Lisa, as a president, we love you, we respect you. We as Secret Service, we know all the answers in the world. We know of absolutely everything. You ask us, we give you an honest answer. What would be your first question?
I'm thinking about stuff that I just wanted to come out. Maybe, the assassination of JFK, things like that are coming to mind that you're just kind of hoping comes out. But in general, I guess.
Would you expose those documents as a president to the public?
Yeah, I just think all should be revealed. There's no reason why any of those documents should be sealed.
Do you think people can handle the truth?
I think they need to. They need to be forced to handle the truth.
So you're not babysitting as a president?
Not at all. I just let it all out.
I'm going to be biased because my mom was a teacher for 25 years.
Okay.
And I know how hard of a job it is. I remember herself coming home at 2 to 3 p.m. and she was checking the homeworks, planning the next day, etc. So I hated history back in school. I don't know why. Maybe because of the teacher. But the more I get older, the more I'm fascinated by the history of humanity and the history of the country that I live in or I love, such as the US or my own country, Lithuania, where I was born and lived for 30 plus years. I just hope that America gets back on the rails with the education. Because I've talked to Rebecca Friedrichs and she told me the stats that there are so many illiterate kids right now that they can't even read or write properly. So those kids are very easily manipulated. If they can't even read, I'm not talking about reading the Bible, it's a hard book to read, but just other books, I believe this is the generation that is going to be manipulated big time. So I just hope that even if Trump declares and decides to abolish the Department of Education, I just hope that if this happens, it will do better for the kids, for the education. And I appreciate you coming to the podcast and shedding the light to the history of the U.S. I felt and I saw the love that you have for the U.S. history, the country itself, and especially for the documents that are crucial to this country. I appreciate you being a teacher, and I just hope that everything that you have in your mind, maybe it's a return to the school and teach your students in
Get
person.
Back in the classroom.
Yes, I just hope that God will do this for you.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time. I love talking with anyone that has that appreciation for history. And there's so many people like you that did not like history growing up. And I'm always dumbfounded to that. And it makes my heart hurt because I get it. I know those history teachers, but it's like, oh, how could you not teach to me? It's just, it's people's stories. And it's so much more interesting than any fiction that can be written.
Correct.
It's such a awesome story to be told. So yeah, I'm glad that you're finding an interest to get back into it and that you spent the time to chat. And I just want to say for sure, Charlie Kirk has that turning point where his organization for college students, I would say there needs to be one called Starting Point, because you have to get them before they're in college, meaning elementary schools is where it all begins. It's where we lost it, and it's where it begins.
Mhm. They took out the Bible, they took out the true history of the country, and with all that, it went off the rails.
Yeah, totally.
God bless you, Lisa.
God bless you.